My name is Serena, and for as long as I can remember, my stepmother made sure I understood exactly where I stood in that house. Not with words, she was too smart for that. It was in the way she'd set 4 plates at dinner and pause like she'd forgotten, then reach for a 5th. The way she'd call my dad's daughters the girls and leave it at that. The way my stepsister Paige would smirk at me across the table and no one would see it but me. And then one Tuesday morning, everything I had built, my job, my reputation, the one thing that was purely mine, got ripped away. Not by a stranger, by the people who were supposed to be family. My stepsister told my dad I stole from her. He didn't ask me a single question, he just told me to get out. She laughed when I walked past her. Didn't even try to hide it. "Good luck out there," she said. "Let's see how long you last." I had nowhere to go. I had nothing but my phone and the clothes I was wearing. But what she didn't count on, what neither of them counted on, was that the truth has a way of surfacing. And when it did, everything she built on top of it came crashing down. Our house on Clover Hill Road looked like something off a real estate listing. Wraparound porch, old oak tree in the front yard. Window boxes my dad replanted every spring. From the outside, it looked like a home that had warmth in it. I used to think it did, before my mom passed and my dad married Deborah 3 years later. Deborah wasn't cruel. That's the thing that made it so hard to explain to anyone. She wasn't a movie villain. She was just quietly, consistently indifferent to me in a way that made my dad think I was imagining things. And Paige, her daughter, 2 years younger than me, she learned from the best. I came back that weekend with a suitcase. I'd been staying at my friend Kara's apartment for a few months while I saved up enough to sign a lease on my own place. I had a good job, project coordinator at a mid-size logistics firm, and I was 2 months away from being able to afford first and last on an apartment. I came back that weekend because my dad had asked me to. A family dinner, he said. He wanted us all together. I should have known better. Paige was already at the kitchen table when I walked in, phone in her hand, not looking up. My dad came in from the garage and hugged me, asked how work was going. Deborah handed me a glass of water like I was a guest. We sat down to dinner, and for about 40 minutes, it was almost normal. Almost. Then Paige set her phone on the table face down and said, very calmly, "Dad, I have to tell you something." I felt it before I understood it. The shift in the air. "My Cartier bracelet is missing," she said. "The one Grandma left me." My dad frowned. "What do you mean missing?" "It was in my jewelry box in my room." She looked at me then, not accusatory exactly, just deliberate. "It was there on Friday. Serena was here Friday." I stared at her. "I wasn't in your room. I'm not saying you took it on purpose." Her voice was soft, reasonable. It was there. And now it's not. And you're the only one who was in the house. Kara was with me the whole time. We didn't go past the kitchen." My dad looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since Deborah moved in, like he was trying to figure out if I was the problem or if the problem was me. He said he was sure it would turn up, but his voice had that careful flatness to it that meant he'd already decided something. Deborah excused herself to check on dessert. I sat there while Paige looked at her phone again, completely unbothered. That night, my dad came to my old room while I was packing up a few things I'd left behind. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. He said he'd looked everywhere and the bracelet was gone. He said he didn't want to believe I'd taken it. He said the word believe like it was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I told him I didn't take anything. I told him to check Paige's other boxes, her coat pockets, her car. Anywhere. He said he had. He hadn't. He said maybe I should find another time to visit, that things were tense, that he needed some space to sort through this. I asked him what he was really saying. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "I think it'd be better if you didn't come by for a while, Serena. Just until we figure out what happened." Paige was in the hallway. I saw her through the gap in the door, leaning against the wall, arms folded, completely still. When I looked at her, she gave me a small smile, not triumphant. Worse than that, satisfied. Like she'd just watched a plan come together exactly the way she'd drawn it up. "Good luck out there," she said as I passed her with my bag. Let's see how long you last. I didn't say anything. I walked out. I didn't look back. The first few nights at Kara's were the kind of tired I didn't have words for. Not sleepy tired. Tired in my chest. I'd lie on her pull-out couch listening to street noise and run through the whole dinner in my head, trying to find the moment I could have stopped it. Kara kept telling me my dad would come around. I wanted to believe her. On Wednesday, my boss Elliot called me into his office. I sat down thinking it was about the Henderson account. I'd been working on a proposal all week, but he had his hands folded on his desk the way he did when something uncomfortable was coming. "There's been a complaint," he said. He told me that a client, one of our long-standing accounts, had called to say that a contractor referral I'd made last month had turned out to be fraudulent, that the contractor had taken a deposit and disappeared, that the client was out $4,000 and believed the referral had come from me personally, not through proper channels. My whole chest went cold. I had made that referral. But I had double-checked the contractor's credentials myself. I had sent the verification documents to Elliot's assistant before passing them to the client. "I sent those documents," I said. "I have the email." Elliot looked uncomfortable. "The email that went to the client doesn't match what we have on file internally. There's a discrepancy in the contractor's license number." I asked to see it. The number in the version sent to the client was off by 2 digits. It was not the document I had sent. I knew immediately. I'd left my laptop open at the house on Friday. I'd been on a call in the backyard for 40 minutes. Long enough. I told Elliot I thought the document had been altered. He didn't look convinced. He said the firm had to take this seriously. He said pending review, I should take the rest of the week off. He used words like protocol and standard procedure. And I heard them all through a kind of ringing in my ears. I walked out of that office and stood in the parking garage for a long time before I could move. I called my dad. He didn't answer. I called again. He picked up on the 4th ring and said he was busy. "Paige tampered with my work files," I said. "While I was at the house Friday, she changed a document on my laptop and now I might lose my job." Silence. "Serena," he said finally, "I think you need to stop looking for ways to blame Paige for everything that goes wrong in your life." I sat in my car in that parking garage for an hour, and then I started thinking clearly for the first time in days. I went back through everything methodically. My email history, my cloud backups, the metadata on the original document. The original file I had sent to Elliot's assistant was still in my sent folder with a timestamp. The version that went to the client had been sent from my work account, but from a device I didn't recognize in the login history. Someone had accessed my account remotely. I took screenshots of everything. I made a folder. I kept going. I called my coworker Jasmine, who'd been in the office the same day I was out. She mentioned that she'd seen Paige in the lobby that afternoon. She'd assumed Paige was there to meet me for lunch. I hadn't known Paige was there at all. I called the building's front desk. They confirmed a guest had signed in to visit my floor. The name in the log? Paige Whitmore. I had the login anomaly. I had the lobby record. I had Jasmine's account. I had the timestamp proving the original document was clean. I also called a locksmith because I'd realized that Paige had a copy of the key to my old car, the one I'd let her borrow once 2 years ago and never gotten back. My car had a phone mount with a charging cable that synced to my phone when I forgot to turn Bluetooth off. She could have gotten into my email that way. I called Kara and told her everything. "You have to go to Elliot with this," she said. "I know, and you have to tell your dad." I didn't answer that part. I went to Elliot the next morning with a printed folder. He sat across from me and went through it, page by page, slowly, without speaking. When he finished, he set it down and rubbed his hand across his face. "Someone accessed your account from an unrecognized device," he said. "Yes. And the guest log shows your stepsister was in the building." "Yes." He picked up his phone and called IT. 40 minutes later, they had confirmed the unauthorized login. The IP address traced back to a coffee shop 2 blocks from our firm, the one Paige worked near. Elliot told me to take the rest of the day, but not for the same reason as before. The firm sent a formal notice to the original client explaining the document discrepancy. They offered to compensate the client directly and pursue the contractor through proper legal channels. They also contacted their legal team about the unauthorized account access. I went home, Kara's home, and sat at her kitchen table and tried to figure out what I felt. Not relief. Not yet. Something more like the feeling right before a storm breaks. My dad called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later. I picked up. His voice was different, quieter. He said Elliot had contacted him. Apparently they shared a mutual acquaintance in the industry and told him what had been uncovered. He said he needed to talk to me. I told him I was listening. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I owe you an apology, Serena. I didn't say anything. I should have listened to you. About the bracelet. About all of it." I asked him if he'd spoken to Paige. He said yes. He said that when he confronted her, she'd denied it at first. Then he'd found the bracelet. It was in the back of her own closet in a coat pocket, exactly where I'd told him to look 2 weeks ago. She'd claimed she forgot it was there. She'd claimed a lot of things. "She told me you'd taken it," he said. I believed her. "I know you did." The silence on the line was heavy. I could hear him breathing. He asked if he could come see me. I told him I needed a few days. I hung up and stared at the ceiling of Kara's apartment for a long time. Paige called me 3 days later from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "I just want to explain," she said. I asked her what she wanted to explain. "I wasn't trying to. It wasn't about hurting you specifically." I waited. "Things have been really hard," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word in a way that sounded practiced but might have been real. "Mom puts everything into making sure Dad is happy. And nobody ever looks at me the way they look at you." I thought about that for a second. About all the dinners where Deborah had quietly, expertly redirected my dad's attention. About the way Paige had grown up watching that. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," I said. "Because it's not. I know. You almost cost me my job. You made my dad throw me out. You did it on purpose." She didn't deny it this time. "I'm not going to pretend I understand why," I said. "But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen either." She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her that was between her and her own conscience. Then I hung up. Elliot reinstated me the following week. Full position, no mark on my record. The firm's legal team was handling the unauthorized access matter separately. He apologized for how the initial situation had been handled, and I appreciated that he said it plainly and without a lot of extra words. My first day back, I sat at my desk and pulled up the Henderson proposal and got back to work. Jasmine brought me coffee and set it on the edge of my desk without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. That Friday, I met my dad for lunch. He was already at the table when I got there, and he stood up when he saw me come in, the way he used to when I was small and he was picking me up somewhere. We sat down and ordered, and then he talked for a while. He talked about my mom. He talked about how hard the years after had been, how Deborah had steadied him in ways he hadn't known he needed. He talked about how he'd let that gratitude become a kind of blindness. I listened. I let him finish. Then I said, "You're my dad. You're supposed to know me well enough to know I wouldn't steal from my own family." He nodded. His jaw was tight. "You chose to believe her over me without asking a single question. That's what I keep coming back to." "I know," he said. "I know." We didn't fix everything that afternoon. I don't think you fixed something like that over lunch. But I also didn't walk away. I paid for my half of the check, and he walked me to my car, and we stood there for a minute in the parking lot. He asked if we could try again. I thought about it honestly, the way you have to when the answer isn't automatic anymore. "Yeah," I said. "We can try." I signed a lease 3 weeks later, first floor of a 2-flat in a neighborhood I'd always liked, with a small backyard and east-facing windows that got good morning light. Kara helped me move in on a Saturday. We put together furniture badly and ordered too much Thai food and sat on my new floor eating out of containers while the boxes piled up around us. It was the first place that had ever been fully mine. Paige, I heard through my dad, had moved out of their house and into an apartment with a roommate. Deborah had gone back to work full-time. The dynamic in that house, without Paige as the fulcrum of it, had shifted into something my dad described carefully as quieter. I didn't push him on what that meant. The firm recovered the client relationship. The contractor situation was resolved through channels I wasn't involved in. The unauthorized access case was still pending. I had a meeting with their legal team scheduled for the following month. I wasn't interested in burning things down. I was interested in what came next. I still thought about that night I walked out of my dad's house with a bag on my shoulder and $40 in my account and no plan. I thought about standing in the driveway and hearing Paige say what she said and choosing not to answer her. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I already knew something she didn't. She'd built her whole move on the assumption that I had no foundation to fall back on. That without my dad's house, I had nothing. That I'd crumble. She was wrong. Not because I had some hidden resource she didn't know about, but because the only thing that actually held me up in the weeks that followed was the thing she'd never bothered to develop in herself, the habit of doing the work, documenting the truth and not panicking when the ground shifts. That's not inspiration. That's just what I learned. The morning light in my new apartment comes in at an angle that hits the kitchen table around 7 and stays for almost an hour. I make coffee. I sit with it. I don't rush. For the first time in a long time, I'm not waiting for someone else to tell me where I belong. I already know. If this story hit close to home, if you know what it feels like to have someone in your corner turn their back on you and still find a way to stand up, stay with me. There's more to come. I've thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the drama of it, not the part that makes a good story to tell, but the mechanics underneath. Because when I look back at everything Paige did, I don't see a person who was winning. I see a person who was spending down a balance she didn't know was finite. Every decision she made, framing me for the bracelet, accessing my work account, altering that document, it wasn't reckless. It was calculated. She put real effort into it. And that's the thing that stays with me, because all of that effort, every bit of it, was pointed in the wrong direction. She was smart enough to pull it off in the short term, and not wise enough to understand that the short term always ends. That's not karma in some cosmic sense. It's just math. When you build something on a lie, you have to keep maintaining the lie. You have to remember which version of the story you told to which person. You have to make sure no one compares notes. And eventually, not always dramatically, sometimes just quietly, the maintenance fails. Something slips. A bracelet turns up in a coat pocket. A login gets flagged. A guest sign-in sheet gets checked. Paige didn't lose because the universe decided to balance the scales. She lost because what she built couldn't hold its own weight. And I didn't survive it because I'm particularly strong or particularly lucky. I survived it because I did the one thing she never accounted for. I kept a clear record. I didn't panic and throw accusations I couldn't back up. I went through my email history. I checked the metadata. I called Jasmine. I asked the front desk. I made a folder and I printed it out and I walked it into Elliot's office and I let the facts speak for themselves. That's the part no one talks about when they tell stories like this. The unglamorous middle part where you're sitting at a kitchen table at midnight going through login histories because you're too angry to sleep but too practical to just be angry. That's where it actually gets decided. The ethical piece for me came down to one choice I made early on. I was not going to lie to match a lie. I was not going to invent things I couldn't prove. Even when I was certain of what Paige had done, I waited until I could show it. That discipline, not because it felt noble, but because I knew anything else would sink me, that's what made the difference. My dad had a blind spot. I understand it better now than I did when I was standing in that driveway. He'd been through a hard stretch after my mom died and Deborah had steadied him, and that gratitude had hardened into something that looked a lot like bias. That's human. That's real. It doesn't excuse what happened, but I've stopped needing it to. What I know now is that the people who underestimate you are often counting on you to react the way they would react. Paige expected chaos. She expected me to blow up, to call her names, to say things I couldn't prove, to make my dad defensive. She expected me to give her something to work with. I didn't give her anything. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. If you're in the middle of something like this right now, if someone has turned people you love against you and you can't see a way through, the only thing I can tell you from the other side of it is this: document everything. Stay truthful even when it costs you. And don't let someone else's chaos become your identity. The work you put into building something real is always harder to fake than the damage someone does in a weekend. Stay with me. There's more.